Welcome to Technosocial. My name is Daniel Fraga.
And I'm Owen Cox. Here we're talking about all things shamanic, symbolic, occult, and technology.
Consider becoming our patron, donating and helping us continue to pump more of this weird and wacky content from the other side of reality all the way to the comfort of your own screen. We hope you enjoy.
Okay, it's going.
All right, welcome everyone to Technosocial. We have Miguel A. Fernandez here with us. He's the author of the series of books on Operative Traditions. It's a book series that really focuses on, well, maybe Miguel, you could give us an introduction yourself as to what it's about and what this term operative tradition means and what do you mean by it?
Yes, it's 4 books, 4 volumes, a lot of different topics addressed, many different topics, but the title says a lot. The title is, above all, operative. Now, the idea of operative, many times we don't use that word in our society because we think of it as operational, functional. What I try to recover is the idea of operative from the perspective of when buildings are the genesis of buildings, how that happens, because we are all accustomed to see when buildings are already finished. But we are not so accustomed to see how that happens and how all that beauty develops. No? So operative comes really, really down to the idea of how to work to such an extent that everything you do creates a meaning that you have no idea, but is, as in the ontological design, it's your being, it's you, it's your sun, it's the center of your solar system, and you have no idea of the mystery. You just produce it. And this is the idea of operative: is to follow the mystery to the end, and playfulness. It's like the kid who just plays and lets things work and develop and doesn't think too much, just it's like a dance, just lets the thing go, develop, and then after that comes a lot of intelligence and not of understanding of who you are in relation to the world. So this is just a very brief summary of the idea of operative, which it is extremely connected to the idea. Even we like to see Gothic cathedrals. They're very aesthetic, they're very beautiful, but the core of the cathedral is to understand how things work from the fundamentals of nature to the most enlightened conditions of nature, the lux natura, which is what is always is the aspiration in all operative disciplines, to find it and to develop it.
Very nice introduction. So that you touched upon a topic that I also wanted to touch upon, which is this idea that, for example, the building of Gothic cathedrals, something that was, it is known to have been done by freemasons or by Templars or whatever. But I think that in one of your introductions to your books, or even on the book, Moritz might have showed it to me, that you referred to this idea that the craft and the idea that when you're actually building it, there's an interplay there. Those people that were building those temples were also building themselves. The pain of crafting the stone is also the pain of crafting yourself. you want to tell us a little bit more about that and sort of that exchange right there?
Well, I think that has a lot of with by designing objects, spaces, tools, experiences, we are in fact designing the human being itself. Yes, this is you, Daniel. You wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think this is absolutely crucial because this is we are. We are prone to think that from the world. And for example, right now we live in a cybernetic industrial society, and we tend to think that the world developing outside of us, that industrialization has nothing to do with our culture, or at least with the things we create in our mind about human life, human culture, all human values. But at the end, when it comes to decision, all those infrastructures, all those architectures really decide the decisions you're going to take in specific moments in your life, where you really have a decision that is existential, not based on what you got here, but based on your values. Mm-hmm. So in this sense, I think that culture really must, and I totally address your texts here, which are really brilliant. Culture must address the fact that the technological world, the industrial world, the cybernetic world has a lot to say about ourselves and can teach a lot about ourselves. It's like Luke Skywalker when talking to C-3PO, and you know, in Star Wars, it's like talking to androids, but you know, it was a way of recognizing the best. You know, so we need to relate to the best of these things and understand them, understand the spirit, and that understanding that by developing them, we develop ourselves. Now, this idea completely contradicts a lot of psychological Freud, Maslow, even Jung, and many other aspects, who think that the psychology is all inside, but it doesn't have to relate to something greater to oneself in terms of production, creation, creativity. And yes, this is a long subject, but I think it's very stimulating and has a lot of important conclusions and derivations.
I love what you're opening up here. I mean, I often find myself thinking that, personally, whenever I try and conceptualize like what might be the meaning of life or of existence, big question to tackle, especially early in the podcast, right? But it's something to do with creativity. Like the universe, the cosmos is creating, is unfolding something. And if there was an ethical imperative, to me, it would be something like find a way to kind of get into the flow of that creativity and enhance it and contribute to it as much as possible in a productive, beautiful way, and not ruin it or just stop it or kind of let it decline. I know something that you've spoken about in some of your work is this idea between a culture based on meaning and a culture based on means, right? Could you expand a bit on what you mean by that?
Yes, what I mean about that. That's yes. Yeah, this goes very to the root of many things that were forgotten for centuries. And I was many years ago very inspired by Gothic culture, which is a whole subject in itself. It's the combination of the Goths who came from the north of Europe and stimulated all the kind of a Judeo-Christian tendencies of thought that derived from the South, and something derived from there was just absolutely impressive in medieval times. So one of the interesting symbols of that time, which you can find over here in Santiago de Compostela, which is it's a center of pilgrimage of all around Europe, is that the cathedral was built in a square that's called the Obradoiro. Now, Obradoiro, or if you go to the root of the term, it means that it was basically a place where people learned how to manage material. Operis is it's a very it's a term that really requires to understand the material you're working with. Now, it's interesting that in the Operative Freemasons, which there are very, very few studies about this, one of the crucial symbols is a chisel and a hammer. You know, it's you stand the chisel with your hand and you impact with the other. And this is the crucial symbol. Why? Because when you start doing that effort against any material, you impact the material. Something in your hand absorbs the energy, the vibration, the voice of the material. You're not conscious about it. It just happens. It just happens. You don't have to do, all you have to do is just, hit. And then eventually you discover with practice and discipline that both hands get a life of their own. Now, isn't that magic? Suddenly something happens to you after a lot of process and discipline, that you can completely develop a sphere of marble or granite in 3 hours. 3 hours. Something that today in applied arts, it would take a month. And you say, where's that come from? Where's that come from? That's a miracle, and there's a lot of testimony 5 centuries ago, 6 centuries ago about that kind of miracle of the senses. And we've lost all that because literacy doesn't allow us this experience. Because of literacy, we have answers for everything. Literacy, but we don't feel the senses anymore as in those times. And the senses have a lot of intelligence that have to be rediscovered.
That's amazing. So as you were talking, what I was thinking about is that indeed these old masters would achieve a mastery. They would achieve this ability to interact, to speak to the material and listen to its voice. This rhymes very much with Manuel de Landa's idea of the morphogenetic potential of materials, which is the idea that, each material already has in itself the potential of things that can be done with it. You can't do certain things with certain materials because you have to adapt. And even today in our post-industrial age, we also have to adapt to that material.
Yes. We have to discover it. But the problem today is that we don't have that connection, direct connection to material anymore, because this is the great impediment, is that we have all these technological mediations with matter, like just the microscope. For example, this is a very simple case. We can't interact with the material. So the fact that we can't interact, we can't communicate, and we can't understand its vibes, we can't understand where it comes from. But this is another thing that is also very shocking for most people, is that the great products, for example, we observe, for example, a Stradivarius violin and stuff, and we see the perfection of how the self-resonance maximizes the properties of the material. But there was no plan of the initial development. There was no plan at all. It just happened because the craftsman discovered with the fingers the vibes of all materials, and then absorbed those vibes, and suddenly something was impregnated, rewired in the nervous system, and then suddenly that called for other combinations, and other combinations, and other combinations, until finally it was all worked out as like saying, oh, I've produced a violin. This is me. Mm-hmm. Well, yes, it is you because it's your nervous system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of, it makes me want to speak about these relationships of scale and of measurement that become so proper to the human body, right? You mentioned that on the microscope, it's, or for example, I would add the example of when we're looking at products that are made on factories, we are very removed from the ability to interact and to craft. We have a petri dish, it's not the same, or we have this cup that was made on a factory, it is not the same as a drawing that I would have created, for example. Why? Because it feels like there's, like you said, or rather, I think it was Evola even who said that the measure of the universe is man, right? And the fact that we have, for example, let's take the example of the Stradivarius builder. That person has 5 fingers on each hand, and there's a specific way of working with the material, trying again and again and again, attaining a certain level of technical mastery. And then from that peak level mastery, there's something else, artistry, that might perhaps emerge. And that's when the great innovations come about. So correct me if I'm wrong. These operative traditions are perhaps a scaffolding. I'm talking about, for example, the operative Freemasons. They are kind of this step-by-step tutorial on how to get to this high level of mastery and artistic channeling.
Yes, I think that generally the problem with developing this kind of a mastery teaching you're telling about is precisely the transition occurred in culture because of literacy, and we don't allow that which Ernst Jünger in his own genius said it's the thought of the touching, mm-hmm. to learn how our mind must be not oversaturated with ideas, but let ourselves give the chance to develop a practice in which we discover that we can even have eyes in our back. Yeah, now this is a great experience. Some sports might allow it, like sometimes in soccer, some people can say, wow, I did the pass, I couldn't even see. It's just intuition pure. Well, it's just little glimpses of a kind of practice that allows to awaken to say, wow, we know nothing. Or the body has an intelligence that is amazing if we allow it to develop. And I think that, for example, in my first volume of Operative Traditions, I wanted to address from a philosophical perspective the idea, experience that someone who was who had education in the Western culture and went to the East and practiced the art of archery with a master, and to understand all his 6-year development of how to understand, say, well, my thought is nothing, my body is everything. I need to understand that I can't establish a difference between what I think I am as an individual and the external world. Now, that is a very difficult realization for most people, but that's the transition that is required if we really want to observe our being outside of us. And this has to do a lot with your saying, Daniel, about ontological design. It's if we need realize, as you write in that text, that the individual is just a construct, a very recent construct historically. But if we look at it with more detail and more care, we realize that we're all connected to the environment much more than we think. And it's good to develop practices or disciplines or something to allow us to get back to that playful state of being that we had when we were kids. We had no idea of the world, but we played and we built great Lego constructions and things, and asked questions that today nobody asks. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have, for example, my niece, who loves ballet. She loves ballet. She has no education. She's just 9 years old in terms of education, but she's trying to discover all these things by herself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, spontaneously. We must recover that. There's a lot of connection between dance and architecture.
Wow. That's deep. I love it. I love that which you are mentioning. I feel like, and this is something deliberate that you said, that you are even deliberately positioned within a Western tradition, or rather that this craft or this perspective that you're trying to uncover from our deep past is fundamentally Western.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with Owen many times, and I think we'll all agree Owen is very much into yoga and Eastern philosophy and Eastern practices. And it feels like the Western way to approach these subjects, which Owen, you're familiar with, has been kind of lost in time, has been lost through Christianization, perhaps lost through literacy, as you say. But that tradition, that operative tradition, that's something, that intangible cultural asset has been progressively eroded. But today, if we are to make sense of the internet, of the material of the internet, of the material and the voice of the material that is human consciousness through the internet, then we need to perhaps uncover what it means to have this operative, spiritual, practical tradition from a Western point of view. I would argue that.
Yes. This is the problem. The second word that I use for these volumes is traditions. It's a problematic word because sometimes we tend to understand that just because we repeat a series of worldviews from the past, or as it is in Latin, it is considered that tradition is tradere, which is the kind of the to each generation to transmit to the next a set of worldviews. Well, that is very relative, as I've seen, because really the idea of tradition is not to transmit worldviews, not even practices, transmit principles. Now, the problem of this is that you can't transmit principles. You can't transmit principles. Transmit principles, you have to learn them. You are not born with them. You have to learn them. And the issue I see with the importing of spiritual traditions from the East is that they have been all literalized. They have been all transmitted. There was not an oral tradition from the East to the West. It was all in books. And the problem with that is that we don't end up understanding the crucial aspect that oral tradition has for transmitting principles. And the principles, you have to discover them by yourself. Nobody's going to give you the clue, the trick. The letter kills the spirit. You know, so one of the alternatives of doing that is operative, which is basically understand this is the work you have to do. Not you have to do, but these are the principles, these are the disciplines. If you survive along the process, it's going to be a hard process, very hard, very tough. You're going to suffer, but if you survive, you might discover those principles. Because it's not the same to, let's say what we were saying at the beginning, to get a chisel and a hammer when you're starting, that when all your hand is bleeding because you're impacting like crazy. It's not the same, and that's part of the process. But then you learn the principles, and the whole thing is that really the problem between the East and the West is that, yes, the West, I would say that these ideas practically extinguished centuries ago. They were still in the East, but the problem is, unless you know Chinese and you live in China or in Japan for 40 years under a great master, how can you learn them? But there is a kind of equivalent view between the East and the West. It's just that we need to create a synthesis, I believe. Yeah.
I agree with much of what you said there. I think it's why within my personal practices, I've tried to actively seek out, if I'm not able to find, like for example with yoga, at least people who have studied with Indian masters. So at least there is precisely that oral tradition. And I think precisely the reason why so many Westerners, myself included, look to the East, to the Eastern philosophies, Eastern practices, are precisely because, as you said, it's kind of died out here, or at least it's much less mainstream. And so the kind of Western alchemy, the Western occultism has kind of receded from the eye. And so people yearning for something go to say yoga or Buddhist meditation. But then the kind of curious thing is that both of these things have been caught up in the logic of capital and consumerism now, to the extent where most people, when they practice, for example, yoga, are not really practicing yoga. They're putting their body into positions, where one of the things that I've had said is that the position is only there to serve your breath. And your breath is about linking your mind to your body and your higher experience, right? The position, another thing I've had said, the position begins when you move your body out of it, right? And so yoga is not about stretching deeply and taking sexy Instagram photos, but it's precisely about the transformation in world experience that comes about through having been into a certain position. It doesn't matter if your head's on your knee or if your head's a fucking meter away from your knee. And again, but what's kind of this interesting point now, as I start to get more curious about the Western alchemical traditions, the occult, because we realize that it is still there. Like, this stuff hasn't gone away, and perhaps it's actually been in its favor, in a sense, that it hasn't allowed itself to go mainstream and be co-opted by capital in the same way. Like, I think, for example, the worlds of yoga and indeed of Buddhism have a big struggle ahead of them, because a lot of their mimetic and their spiritual currency, if you will, has been totally diluted and kind of been institutionalized in Western kind of mainstream capitalist culture in a way that makes very little sense compared to what it was actually designed to do and where it came from, to the extent that people now practice what you call like mindfulness meditation, thinking that they're doing something very profound. And it's a total kind of butchery of what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah, it's basically the issue here is that once you discover those principles that I was referring to, you develop your own system of yoga for your own life. You don't need to follow a manual. Let's put it that way. You already find out your own standards, which are good for you. You find they are good for you, for your union, because that's the idea of yoga, to a union with totality or with the transcendental or the ontological aspect of our lives, which provides us meaning. But the thing is that we are no longer living in the conditions where these cosmologies were produced. Now, this is the crucial issue. And this is very radical, what I'm saying right now, that is that we can't really rely in none of those cosmologies which were produced in conditions which were not cybernetic architecturally, which were not urban industrial. We don't have the same flesh as those people. We don't have the same brain as those people. Our phylogenetics, all our genetic inheritance is not the same. We don't have the same gesture. We don't have the same emotions. We are completely different, modified, and nothing works in that sense. And it's all, as you said, Owen, it's become a business, and a lot of people I know profit from that, of creating that illusion, like creating placebo effects in the medical industry and many other things. But at the end of the day, it's not allowing people, and this is the crucial thing, to understand their relation to their environment, to their social context, and to the world they are living. And as a great proof of this was the last months with all this crisis of the coronavirus, because you've seen that people who had been practicing yoga, spiritual therapies, and all this stuff, suddenly they became more anxious than anyone else, because of this thing. And I've seen this myself, and I say, well, something's wrong with them, or something wrong with the people who are trying to teach them through spiritual traditions and stuff. I think there's a little bit of both parts, but I know a lot of people won't understand this, but I think we need new approaches. And I think ontological design is very to me practical, disciplinary. It allows people to understand the processes which surround them, technological, industrial, and to find a way of discipline that allows them to see, to make a meaning of the meanings, to understand that in all this structure of the world, there is still meaning, although it's all chaotic. And also, some people might think this is something that depends on faith, but it's not about faith either. It's about presenting a discipline, presenting so that people can discover the magic, the mystery, and follow it, because that's the thing. They have to follow it once they discover it. And there is mystery still today.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to say where I think it is valuable to study these things that have gone before is precisely in experiencing that there are practices that do have meaningful effects. And so it may well be, like as you said, that the actual cosmology, the worldview as produced or as described by something like yoga or a particular form of Buddhism is no longer apt for a cybernetic environment, like for example the belief in a universally reborn soul, right? But yet the operative part of it, the discipline of sitting down every day to meditate and to focus the consciousness, to do that dhyana, is I see it as a building block to any kind of ontological design or operative frameworks that we do going forwards. Like we can't just, I think there's sometimes discussions about like we can think our way into new practices and new psychotechnologies, for example. I don't think that's the right approach. I think the thing is to do, it's like you go forwards by studying the old masters brilliantly. It's like we read Plato. We don't necessarily subscribe to the theory of forms, but you kind of need to get Plato to get the rest of philosophy.
Well, this is Goethe. He and Faustus. He developed this idea very well. There's this idea of Faustus who was trying to find knowledge and wisdom through literacy, through books and stuff, and said, I have not gained anything, you know. So I think it's interesting as Westerners, because Faustus is a typically Western myth. It's good for us to understand to what extent many all the knowledge that has been transmitted to us in philosophy, science, and understand the limits. I think that's a crucial point, and we must always criticize even science, which is today everybody admires science, ideologies, even philosophy. You know, so it gets to a point that you're in this nigredo phase, that you don't believe in anything, but you want to prove everything. You want to, go forward. I think if we could encourage that to people, that would be great, because it's like saying, okay, experiment your way. I'm not going to tell you what you're going to go. Just go your way, go your way, go your way. And you'll discover things that it will be fantastic. It's going to be hard. I know, but everything's hard. So, but you're going to do the hard way in a kind of encouraging way. So why not? So the thing is to discover the limits of knowledge, not to like kids, you just play with things. You have no idea of what you're doing. You just play. And eventually you'll discover new languages, new gestures, new relations with materials. You'll discover a lot of things that are completely unexpected in general by most of the traditions available. So I think it's a good thing to have this hunger for knowledge, but as long as it allows one to criticize it, to overcome it, to say, okay, this is fine, but I need to eat something more. I need something else, So here comes it's a pure question of values. It's a pure question also existential of the person, of how far this person wants to reach, because some people can't go along the path. It's too dangerous, too painful, but some people will, and those are the people we should encourage to go in that direction, if we see they want to go in that direction. And then these people will go in that direction, and they can speak to you about Buddhism, yoga, Socrates, Plato, but from another completely different perspective, which is much more encouraging and allows you to solve the problems with your dog, the problems with your wife, the problems with your kids, the basic things we need in life, to just how to relate to our environment, to our direct environment. And I think, operative things, operative disciplines are great for those who especially discover that there's much more to them than most people expected. We tend to think in the West that thinking is everything, but it's just a very superficial layer of everything. It's how we can, it's like the idea of the archer and the bow, how we direct, our thoughts in a specific direction. It's that's more an Eastern view of things.
So the direction to which we aim our thoughts is like the hammer and the chisel. We can align it with the flow of the world, especially today, cybernetically. I like that idea. I wanted to touch upon something which is present in your work, which to me also resonated a lot, which I think is very lacking overall in society, which is heroism. Which is the call for those who are willing to engage in any sort of path that has to do with pursuing their dream and putting the dream at the command of their lives. And the thought that this very process points away, whatever that way may be in the specific circumstances of each of our lives. And in following that way, that there is a certain heroism, and that the myths that we've inherited from the past, this is what I would say, are there to furnish that way, are there to serve as signposts, as warnings and advice, but they are only useful insofar as you are in the way. someone who is perhaps chasing their dream will get Gotha much more than if you're forced to read it in high school and you don't really like it. And there's risk in perhaps pursuing this path, and like we said, it's dangerous, not for everyone. And so that perhaps is the role of the operative framework that one can inherit or one can adopt or look at. It's advice if you're already performing some sort of work like this, no?
Yeah, probably the as Owen was saying a while before, the reason why you would eventually in your life start observing all these spiritual traditions, because you want in your life, you want some meaning, and you just can't adapt to many social standards, which you realize the game. Let's put it that way. The only reason you would start criticizing or considering that the relativity of all those for your life is because you have already understand yourself that your own heroic path, which is basically that of discovering that you owe all to yourself. That's the whole teaching of a heroic path of defeating death, is that you all owe it all to yourself. And then you survive that critical point, if you do. And then you will say, okay, what happened here? What happened? I need to keep on living for a while. I'm 30 years old, let's say, and you say, okay, I've done a heroic path, but I need to keep on working. I need to keep on working in this world. And then you discover that your heroic substance, simply all the things you read in the spiritual traditions, like saying, no, because it's not enough. So you try to find ways eventually how to connect with the world, how to bridge with the real circumstances of the world, and you try to connect to people, you try to connect to processes. The best way, you try to translate that experience to the world, and language is simply not enough. Common language is simply not enough. You have to play with it all. You have to find your own language, your own ways of relating to things, and then eventually you might discover that there is something interesting about just simply working with your hands. If you have that luck, you'll discover a lot of interesting things, and it will make you say, well, this is all I need to keep on surviving and keep on producing and seeing the things I have in my spirit in the world. And so yes, I would say that the trigger is a heroic experience, something that we don't have. We don't have much access today to that, because we lack adventure. We lack the idea of people going beyond the what people expect from them, and just saying, look, I'm going to take 3 years and I'm going to risk everything. I'm going to go. We don't have 3 years today, because you need to make a living. You need to, we don't have 3 years to just put it all in the oven for most people. But if people could be provided that experience differently. And in fact, it's not a coincidence that historically the operative Freemasons were sort of descendants of the Knight Templars, you can say, in the sense of the tradition. It's just that they didn't have that warrior character, but they were just more focused in developing that memory and producing that memory.
Can you tell me more about the Templars and the Freemasons? This is something I don't really know that much about, and I'm fascinated by, and I assume some people listening would be too.
Yes, the Templars. Well, there's a lot of stories, historiography about the Templars, but really, what is interesting is Knight Templars. If you understand, for example, the myth behind, because there's the part of the historical data, but also the myth and legend. So if we look at, for example, the case of Wolfram von Hessenbach or other writers, we can see that it coincided in that time, the idea of what happened with the spiritual aspect of the Templars with the creation of the legend. Now, there is of the Templars, but what happened in that time as well was there was a co-opting from the church of the Crusades. But it's interesting to observe that the Knights did not had an imperial view of how to develop the European territory by itself. And this is I know this is a bit of a controversial issue, but that was not at some point something that, for example, the Pope in Rome at that time, nor Lebel in France, who was he was called we call him in Spain Helvejo, who was a prince, a Christian prince in France. They were not allied with that movement, so they destroyed the Templars elite, and as a consequence, Jacques de Molay, who was the master of the order, had to be burned in Paris, in Notre Dame. And then all the history of the Templars died at that moment. It was 1314 in our age. But
the 13th, right?
Yeah, and it was, since then you can't talk about Templars anymore because it's just a memory. The spirit was dead already. So so there is a connection between the Templars and the Freemasons, understanding the power of the earth, of how it can develop and how you can facilitate that development if you participate in that. They always thought that participation, because it's interesting, because the concept of participation is the idea of the crafts. When you said you were going to participate in crafts, they didn't say, oh, you're going to participate in craft. No, to learn craft. No, you are going to participate. That was the idea. You're going to participate. And there was always a woman at the top, like saying, okay, participate. Okay, you want to build a woman? Build it. Yeah. So it was old ideas.
There's a couple of things that I want to pick up from what you said. One of them was build a woman. All I could hear is Metropolis from Fritz Lang and the internet as this artificial spider that we're building that's gonna eat us up or not. And then there's the other idea, which is it is said sometimes that there's a connection between the tradition initiated by the Templars and the Freemasons. And then as it developed through time, perhaps underground, perhaps obviously through a lot of forks along the path, that there was an influence by mystical Judaism, as well as with alchemy and the Kabbalah. So there's a big cross-fertilization in here. I like this topic precisely because it feeds into something which is also, let's say, alluded to in many, let's say, alternative thinkers, which is the following: that today, in the West and perhaps in the globalized world, the there are perhaps people suspect that there's a few people that have a monopoly on these crafts, especially crafts that work, and that most people are left outside. And this was also kind of the way that many of these societies used to work. It's all about the silence, keep away. Obviously, when you're working with a chisel, it's between you and yourself, and there's no words. Like you said something beautiful, which was literacy kills the soul, or the letter strangles the soul, which is nice. What it feels to me is that today, in the era of the internet, and if we're going to translate all this tradition into what is the operative tradition of the age of digital and the internet, all I can think about is that we are now faced with working with another process, with facilitating the emergence of another process. If the craftsperson is working with the stone and facilitating the emergence of a statue of a woman, isn't that what we're doing all together in the age of digital? I'm speculating a bit. So please
very great. It's amazing stuff. I think it's the idea is to recover the principles. Well, right now, I don't think there is some memory of the legends of the Templars or the freemasons, especially in architecture and art, but really it doesn't tell us anything. We can speculate about all that a lot, and a lot of people are speculating a lot about that. But once the principles are captured, the idea is to understand which is our relation to the earth. This is the key point, because the earth is the source of creativity. We've lost that idea because we think that humans, we are the source of creativity. No, we're just insects in this skin of the earth. That is what we are. We're just insects, like other insects in a plant, but we don't have the design. We don't have it. We're just facilitating that design like an enzyme. So once we realize that, which is kind of a tough realization because it destroys generally our sense of individuality, that I do this because I want this. No, you're just an object. You're just a tool of something that is greater than you. So once this realization is accomplished, then what happens is that we aim to find our connection to the earth. Now, which is our connection to the earth today? Technological, purely technological. We extract our energy, we extract our ideas, everything mediated through technological mediation. Now, it's interesting, Daniel, you say something very interesting here, that is well, you were just pointing out basically the ideas of the prosthetics theory. Basically that we can't separate our perception from our technology. And I think it is a very important realization to understand that we have lost completely the connection with the earth, with the planet, with the creative potentials of the earth. And as you said, Owen, basically if you look in all the spiritual traditions, basically the alignment of the Kundalini, for example, it's always aligned with the earth. It's the basic idea is that the Kundalini is the forces from the earth, and it has to be aligned with the earth. You can't do it individually. It's a whole. So I think that's the basics. We have to connect to the earth to unravel all the mystery and to unravel all the potential creativity. So the thing is, one important thing here is to clearly differentiate technology from technique. Now, this is actually to way. For example, I think I have to expand myself a bit here to express this. Yes, it's, let's say that we are we do something. Now, if we are under conditions of stress, and when I mean under conditions of stress, I mean uncertainty and those conditions where you have no practice or experience by yourself, and you are trying to resort to your cultural values as a way of resolving a conflict. Well, then what will happen there is that your cultural values, those things that have been conditioned into you, will only create in you a state of anxiety, which will block your connection to something that is communicating to you, but that only seems to make you nervous. You know, like it makes you nervous, makes you anxious. Now, if you are able to learn that through the techniques that the world is developing, the planet is developing through industrialization, through cybernetics, through developing all you can develop in that realm, you're going to be like the hand of the planet, expressing what that planet wants to communicate to other people. Now, if you simply reject that, if you reject all that, eventually what will happen is that neurosis will happen. Neurosis, and we know that neurosis is basically a disconnection between our cultural values and what is actually happening. So I really think that Ernst Junger had a lot of genius, personally, when he claimed that the bourgeois values, which were purely intellectualistic, and not intellectualistic, but very squared, didn't allow us to have that experience of chaos, that experience of the elementary. But every time you touch the elementary, that Vulcan, that energy, you know more about yourself. You know more about yourself through the communication of the earth. So that's the first contact we have to have. It's the ham against the chisel that we have to relate to that. So technology doesn't help. I have to say it doesn't help, but technique does. Technique means it's not about the kitchen. It's how you cook. Yeah.
So something that came to mind there, you're talking about the bourgeois, right? And this neuroticism and this disconnection from what I might term as that kind of Dionysian pathic creativity, in a sense. And I would expand on that by just bringing up that there's also the way that the modern culture we live in finds a way to neuter art and creativity by phrasing it, as Chris Gabriel, who we spoke to recently, put, it's just art, right? And so something that is beautifully transcendent, it might produce intense feelings in those who participate in it or experience it, but it's just art. And more than that, it's viewed as entertainment, and perhaps if you're in certain circles, as escapism, as a way to find something nice that takes you away from the grind or the world where you have to be proper and mind your manners. But nothing more than this.
Yeah.
As I said, it's just art. It's neutered, and this chimes with what I think has happened, and you guys can probably say more on this, but about just kind of design and architecture more broadly in the 20th century, which is all either kind of functionalism or really base postmodernism, which is like, let's just do something weird because we can.
Yes, unfortunately, that's the case. So we must recover the idea of art not as simply as something, as you said, Owen, as entertainment for during your leisure time, but as something that favors life. And this is why I really want to go back to the super fantastic 12th, 13th century, just not because I idealize that period, but there was some interesting things there in our tradition, in the Western tradition, that just were forgotten for a lot of centuries. But the idea is that art serves life. It's not about you get a economic standards of living, wealth, and stuff, and then you say, "Oh, I want to start painting. I want to start painting." No, it wasn't about that. It was if you started to develop the earth, and because there's something also that I always want to present in my work, which is that architecture, as you said, Owen, today is just something very decorative, aesthetic. It has turned into those very visual aspects, especially in terms of building and accommodation of private housing and everything else. But we can consider that today our architecture, from the most strict perspective, are the networks, are the infrastructures of transport communication, are 5G, are all these waveforms, satellite communication. That's really architecture today. Buildings, it's over. Today we are supported. Today you see people in their houses, but they're connected to the internet today. They're supported by the internet. They're supported. That's their architecture. It's not the physical building. It's something much greater, planetary. It's something much more greater. So the idea that is architecture. It's a structure of power. It's a structure of power, and this is another topic which would require another complete conversation. It self-organizes. So at a planetary scale, I mean, if we see the snowflakes self-organize and the Milky Way self-organize, why won't this system self-organize? We believe we're so powerful as humans that we can determine it, but we can't determine the growth of the snowflake nor the growth of the Milky Way. So why will this be determined by us? We just can only follow the light behind. It's the only thing we can do. So the issue of art, that one important thing is that it served the economy. Today we think that first you have to have a level of economy, and then you have to produce art. But really, there's a aspect that it's hard to explain in few words, but is that it is economy. We have been living for 3 centuries thanks to fossil fuels, especially in a condition where we have the capacity to impose upon nature whatever we want. But this is a luxury, because generally, if you're in a situation in nature where you don't have that availability, that extreme availability of energy coming from a grid, electric network, whatever, the only way you can survive is understanding nature, not intellectually. You have to relate, you have to capture the vibes of the stones, of the sand. You have to capture it all so that you can then capture how the cycles that impregnate during time, during different cycles, the whole territory, so that you can couple with them, build with them, and you then create an architecture which is not arbitrary, which is not something, so I want to build it because I like it. No, you have to build it because it's what the territory is asking for you, and the territory is asking for you to help the territory so you can expand its meaning. So you do it because you want to survive, and you do it because you want to extract all the energy, all because this is the crucial thing. The second law of thermodynamics says that the energy dissipates constantly, the energy in a closed system. So what you have to do is create a countercurrent to that dissipation, and it's very hard unless you have information. And you have to have information of all the aspects, not information in your mind, information in your senses. That's how it works. And if you have the information in your senses, then suddenly something will start working in your hand, and you'll build something, and you say, wow, this is beautiful. But then you say, but I didn't even plan it. But you just worked out all the materials of the territory, and you say, well, looking back, wow, this is really great. And and you had no idea, no plans, anything. Yeah, but it allowed you to survive. That's art. That's art. It's a way of expressing, and the idea of the ontological design is like, basically you've created that. That's you. Can you separate that thing from you? No, you created it. You participated in it, and but it's something greater than you. Always something much more greater than you. So when this experience just completely dissolves in the idea of individuality, it's like saying, "Oh, it's because I want, because me, because no."
Mm-hmm. That's remarkable. That's really making me think. And one of the things that comes to mind is how does one relate to the exceptional circumstances that we live in today, where the previous efforts to harness and cope, or how do you say, to harness the energy of nature in this way that is not arbitrary, right? You're going to put a windmill next to the water. That's where you put it, period, because you need to eat, you need to mold the grain there, etc. So we were very successful at doing that, or rather we were successful until the point that we discovered another source of energy, this oil and gas-based world order that we live in right now. And that has invented sort of a new set of relations. It has invented this autonomous network that lives out there of information, of commerce, of power. And it's putting us in this position that is new historically, that may or may not be like an exception in terms of, just a blip on the radar of the Earth's life cycle. It might be the case that this is exceptional, and in 500 years, we go back to the Dark Ages and we never come back to this hyper-technological state. We've lost a lot in the way, but yes, the challenge of our day, and we are men of our time, has to do something with solving the challenges of solving the challenges of the internet. And the internet is above the rivers. It's above the fields. It comes because we've solved that problem already very much. And so that's kind of the conundrum that I'm pointing towards. Like, what's the hidden framework with which to relate in there? In other words, how can my hand hear the voice when there is no material, when the material is virtual?
Yeah.
So I was asking that if there is a way to relate to nature, a proper way that is not arbitrary, one that comes from a relationship that we gain from not only our senses, but also our need for survival, then today, as people of our time, how can we relate to the paradigm of the internet? In other words, how can our hands sense the voice of the material today, that the material is virtual? Or is that even the right question to be asked? It seems like the internet doesn't want this question to be answered.
Someone is watching. Someone is pushing this question down.
Twitter is censoring us. Hunter Biden did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Do you mind maybe taking it up from the question that I asked, if you remember?
Yes. Okay. Okay. So the problem, I think, here is that nature is a word I'm not very personally not very happy with, because it has been there's a lot of connotations that separate nature from civilization from many centuries ago, and I think I prefer to use the term cosmos, which is basically organization of all elements towards a meaning that we might know or not, but that providing but if we have an experience of all those elements, we can access that meaning. I don't think people just having picnics around or just going to the beach will have a better understanding of that meaning. I think you must relate directly to technology to technique, to the industrial processes, to cybernetics, because that's the layer that's going on right now in the earth. It's a power structure that wants to be discovered, that wants to find its own language, and that need us to develop the language, because as humans, that's what we can do, because animals, unfortunately, they can't do that. So I think that right now, the idea is basically to relate more, first to have I think it's important to create human experience, first of all, with other, so that people can share their existential, their trauma as sons and daughters of this age, to have a therapy in the sense of knowing how to overcome that trauma, because it's already a quite trauma to have been born in this age with all this conflict and all this thing, and then to discover that basically there are, if we understand cyber or the paradigm of cybernetics, we seem to get it in ourselves in the same way when you're with a chisel and a hammer integrating the language of the stone. Now, we talk a lot about, for example, the information, about the internet, about virtuality, but you will notice that those who understand computer architecture from the fundamentals, and I mean electronics, and I mean server systems, regulation systems, you'll see that they are a little bit skeptic about the interest of cybernetics, because cybernetics is all it's all self-regulated. It's all how can I explain this? It's all about information, and when there is an error, you need more sensors and more systems to address that information, which creates that the database is getting bigger, and never stops. and you can get quite caught in that process. And the thing is that what we want? Is that what we want? That's the question. I think that what we want is to build up from that. I think we must address, thanks to the internet, we have great information available. I can contact you, I can contact many other people around the world, and that's great. But at the same time, I think it's like saying, okay, now I've worked this material, good, I know how it works, but now I need to keep on developing more and more other materials, other paradigms. I think right now we should start using the word paradigms instead of material, because paradigms are just not something in our brain, it's something how we operate with.
Paradigms instead of materials. Wow. It's like the building block is that's ontological design, right? Or rather, like reality bubbles are precisely the material that we play with now.
Yes, the concept of paradigm, it's interesting because many people relate it to just scientific models, but it's much more than that. It's the way you solve a problem. It's the way, let's say you're in a specific circumstance, you have to solve a problem, and you can have a great formal education at the university in different models, but then you're faced with a specific problem when you have to really integrate the materials, let's put it that way. It can be human materials, it can be the spirit of people, it can be technical problems, it can be many different circumstances. Your paradigms is something you build you don't build by just passing exams. It's solving in very difficult circumstances. You know, the military training, they knew a lot about this in the past. That was what provided, the not hierarchy, but different levels of responsibility. It was the degree to which extent you could solve a problem here and now, quickly, just quickly, like pure reflex. You know, and it's that's paradigm. I consider that paradigm. And for example, you see the best engineers, they don't necessarily have the best education, but they have a powerful set of paradigms in their hands, in their experience. And it's just a completely different way of understanding the way people relate to the environment. So I think right now it's not about so much about like the traditional way of relating to nature, just going to the little of I don't know, cultivating plants and all that. That's fantastic. It's an aspect of it. But right now there are many other layers upon us right now who have much more power. Yeah, and one of them are the cybernetic ones. The cybernetic architectures are very powerful. In fact, they attract all the capital, all the economic capital of the world. There's a reason for that.
Fantastic. Yes, it's this broad autonomous infrastructure that is superposed into what they call the technosphere, that comes on top of the geosphere and the biosphere, or some people call it the noosphere, because sometimes the cybernetic layers either can be confused with, or they can give way to the noosphere, the sphere of the mind and the ideas. And so sometimes when I speak about ontological design, I feel like today is a special age because it enables us to, given the tremendous advancement of cybernetic technology, the internet, digital, etc., this allows us to really dive deep into the sphere of mind, because the sphere of mind is nothing but the sphere of how ideas propagate, how memes propagate, how humans exert power over others, utilizing speech, utilizing ideas, nudging each other's social norms into position, exerting power. And power is a very interesting concept and very important, especially today in the age of the noosphere, and where the war, fourth generation warfare, is actually being fought there. Foucault is, I think, one of the best guys at talking about power, not so much in the sense that he is commonly referred to in common parlance, but precisely because he understood one very key thing about power. That is that it is diffuse, and it's not a property of things, but a property of relationship between things. And that's the right thing.
Okay, so that's exactly a very crucial point about power. That is that there is something crucial to understand. Once we understand, which is I know it's challenging in general to understand, for example, the second law of thermodynamics. I have to say that even in the past, I was teaching this subject for some months, and I know how challenging it is even for students at universities. So it's even probably much more challenging to people in general. But one thing that must be clear about it is that the second law of thermodynamics, the only way it can be, the only way you can harness energy for life in a system so that an economy can be possible is through power. Now, that power as experimented by Maxwell in his demon, you must have exact information of all the processes taking place surrounding you, so that you can counteract the natural tendency of nature to degrade its energetic levels. Now, if we consider this, we have to necessarily hypothesize the existence of links between all beings participating in that process. But those links have to be in real time. They cannot be statistical. They have to be exact. Because if they're not exact, you can't defeat nature. Nature will just go down, and you will not harness the energy for an economy. So anybody who's participating in an economy, there has to be necessarily something. People, Sheldrake calls it morphogenetic fields. Other people East call it Tao, whatever. It doesn't mind. But there has to be something that connects the motions of all beings involved. So, and we participate in this process, being enzymes or catalytic factors of this process. And this already, once you realize this, it's like say, wow, so I am nothing. You say, I am nothing. Of course you're nothing. You are nothing. You're just participating in something greater than yourself. So of course you're nothing. Okay, just get on with it. Get over it and just accept it and just doing something. Participate, do something, So the issue is that really there is a proof. I would say it's completely provable that there has to be necessarily a connection between all beings to create economies. And even today, in the case of the technosphere or these architectures that are being developed, it is to harness all the energies of the earth. And if we look right now at the levels of energy consumption in the primary sector, they're more than ever. They're more than ever in history. More than ever. I think right now, probably because of the combination of fossil fuels, nuclear energy, fracking, and we have never extracted so many energy from the earth, and that's the whole process. Even enzymes do. What's the point of an enzyme? To extract the energy from a local chemical reaction. So it's a much greater.
This this reflects a lot what we discussed with Raven, insofar as this biological metaphor that we are enzymes in the earth trying to produce transformations and to produce creations, but we are just an enzyme within this larger span of things we are participating. That reminds me of what Raven was talking about when she mentioned that we are part of this lineage that stretches all the way to the origin of life, that even stretches all the way back to, Big Bang and whatever else has happened before that, because there has been a cause and effect. There has been effects of networked systems stumbling down through history and producing those small economies that eventually reach critical points and transform, and then reach a critical point and transforms. And the name of the game is what Greg Enriquez talks about when he talks about these emergence moments, and that there's complexity gets to a point where boof, there's another thing, and then boof, there's another thing. Yes. So that's a very good angle with which to look at the current moment in time that we're living in, right? Because we can get lost and conceive of the future using the words in the terms of the past. However, it's perhaps more useful to trust the process and understand that we are just participating in something very large, and that we don't really have that ability to affect the change that we would love to, but that there's actually something, this superorganism superimposed upon the earth, that's actually producing its effects. Maybe that superorganism is not an organism in the sense that we are used to defining life, but nonetheless, it might have those characteristics of a living autonomous entity.
Yes, and one thing that is very hopeful, but I don't like the word hope, because hope is a word that has been ideologically co-opted, like saying, okay, we expect things, because in all ideology, there's kind of linked to the idea of progress, that you expect things to happen in the future that are coherent with that ideology, whatever ideology, they're all kind of with the same nature. But the thing is, I think that I completely agree with Ernst Junger in some ideas, although he has a different language than me, but in the sense that the cosmos in general aspires to make use of everything that is typical. He used the term typical that has been translated in many different ways, but it is something that is individuated. That's another concept that requires another complete conversation, but it's something that has attained perfection in its production and that cannot progress more because it has exhausted all the potentials in its background. This is a concept. It's like a snowflake that when it grows to its maximum, it won't grow more. Or a tree that grows to its maximum, it reaches its maximum expression, and it won't grow more. So nature tends to, the cosmos, better said, to aspire to make use of this and of these expressions and take them, carry them to the next level, It always happens from the level of microorganisms to the level of civilizations. There's no contradiction about this. There's no exception. So the inspiring aspect of understanding this is that we must have to tell people, like, look, you have a lot of problems. We all have a lot of problems, but try to make perfection out of your imperfection the best you can. Nothing. What else can you do? But if you're spending all your time talking about politicians, talking about all the stuff that they're telling you that is completely unsubstantial, it does not allow you to change your life or to modify your life for better. It's a waste of time. It will just go like grains in the sand. So I think we should try to promote this idea of people, really trying to self-overcome themselves, to perfect themselves. What else can we do? And then the wind shall carry us wherever we need to go. But that. I think.
Well, this is where that Zoroastrian idea of Horovatat becomes very interesting as a kind of alternative to a metaphysics and a worldview based on the view of perfection. So as far as I've been kind of taught, Horovatat translates to something like wholeness. And it's an idea that, as far as we can tell, is older than the idea of perfection. And there's no perfection within wholeness. Rather, it's an aspiration to maximizing potential to the degree that it can be maximized, but without there being this sense that it is pure and that it has destroyed, I guess, all impurities, that it has attained something lasting and kind of permanent and frozen in a sense. Because a forest can be whole, and then you can plant another tree in the forest and it's still whole. It's just a bigger hole, right? Whereas if the forest was perfect, then another tree added to the forest would destroy its perfection, or a tree removed from the forest would destroy its perfection.
Yeah, the perfection. The idea is basically, one of the things I think is very useful is, for example, if you have a pain or you feel bad, or you have some emotional bad days, or sometimes even depression, and it's we tend to consider that all that is something that has to be eliminated. That has to be eliminated through medicine, through anesthesia, through all kind of placebo effects stuff. But the idea that we to cope with pain, to cope with imperfection, to cope with what nature is telling us that is something that we have to correct and understand the root source of that can lead us, at least if we have not gotten the best phylogenetic inheritance, to reach the best we can in our lives. And then nature will be, I think, well, Darwinists might think whatever they think about this, but they tend to favor that process of challenging pain. And in fact, precisely talking about Junger was, I would say, one of the greatest experts in pain and how it related precisely to the technosphere. That the conditions in our time are very much related of pain to the technosphere. So what we do is, in general, in our society, we don't want to face pain because it's just too hard to face this new environment. So in general, there is this thing of favoring comfort or creating this anesthesia of pain, or this kind of obsession for pleasure, which okay, it's great, but you're still then captured through in a territory like an animal, like a zoo, the technosphere, and you can't even see it. Why? Because you have, as Marshall McLuhan said, you have your senses completely numbed right now. You've got them numbed. And well, you know, as long as you're in the zoo, it's okay. But when you get out, you know, you feel too much anxiety, and it's hard. So I think these are the basic issues right now. You know, to how to live in the system. This is the thing: how to live in the system, and to have a destiny in the system, in this fatality. Because we can't, as I said, it's self-organization. We can't change the processes of self-organization, but we can do the best as humans. We can. Yeah.
I mean, what you've been driving at is precisely where I think the material humanist worldview and the current left go wrong. Is this basically this metaphysics oriented towards the imperfections and the sufferings of the world, and this idea that if we can just get rid of those, then that's basically the ethical task. And once we've gotten rid of suffering, which, by the way, is all caused by material insufficiencies, lack of money, lack of resources, lack of food, lack of education, lack of equal treatment, whatever it is, get rid of those inequities, if you will, and the human condition will somehow then be perfected, and we can live in this like fully automated luxury communism, or at least a consumer paradise where all of our basic needs are met, and so we're happy, right? But it's very naive, because it fails to take into account that desire itself is the kind of root of suffering, and the fantasy, like an object will fulfill your desire. You have a kind of feeling of lack. You want something, you're hungry, you eat, and then you feel miserable an hour again afterwards because you get hungry again. You're never going to feel satisfied just through getting basic needs, basic sufferings anesthetized, if you will. But then also, it loses that orientation towards the transcendent. It loses the connection with the creative principle of the cosmos, with that grand unfolding, which I think, as I kind of said at the start, is a far more potent source to root an ethics in. It's not like, let's get rid of suffering, but let's create beautifully and passionately, and get rid of suffering along the way. Because the more we can get rid of at least unnecessary suffering, the more energy and the more resources we can free up for creativity.
Yes, that's basically that. I would say that's a spell of an ideology that was implanted in our minds. This thing that eventually you will reach to those conditions by following all what society expects from you, what the economic systems expect from you, and then eventually you will reach that super paradise. I think this has a lot to do with people who have been directly or indirectly influenced by the myth of paradise, the biblical myth of paradise, like, oh, you have to suffer. There's all this idea of guilt, so you have to suffer all that guilt. Finally, eventually, you are redeemed from all that guilt because of you've done hard work all along the way. You expected finally in your life to do whatever you want to do, but you just died to do it.
Yes.
And so it's I think it's unfortunately it's a spell. It's a spell. It's a spell that persuades most people. But I have to say another thing. For our society today, that spell is necessary. So the 7 billion people can live in the world. But on the other hand, that pain of those people can serve other people to realize, to say, okay, we see what's going on. You have granted us freedom to start considering this right now in 2020, after 100 years of suffering, pain, and all this stuff. And so we have to have compassion for these people and say, well, it's nothing else. What can we? Because even if you try sometimes to even awaken them, it's impossible. It's just the spell of ideology is too hard to take off from people. And generally, if you start telling these things, it's not. You have to leave people. I think, in my opinion, this is an opinion, personal. People who are captured in the spell of ideology, you just have to. There's nothing you can do. You just have to let them go and follow your own path and face the suffering your way, but not trying to anesthetize the pain, but living it and feeling it. I think our nervous system learns a lot from it, and but this is all issues that are challenging in a society. That also another spell is that of comfort. That comfort is morally conceived as good. As I said, at the beginning of the conversation, the great period of means, the great period of the operative traditions was in the last one was in the West. It was the Gothic period in Europe, and it was the mix of barbarians coming from the north who had really hot-blooded guys, who are warriors, who had a deep sense of honor, their cult was basically strength, the withstanding of pain, and they loved war. They really loved war. And the combination of the Goths with the currents that came from the south, that were basically influenced by Judeo-Christianity, and the idea in those religions was basically that peace was everything, but without working for peace. That it was all about. Well, this is a long story, but basically it was about believing that there's an outworldly thing, God or whatever, monotheistic religion, that will answer your prayers, even if you just don't do anything in your life to solve your own conflict. So there was this kind of Vulcan that happened in Europe at that time. And I think today we need something similar. We need people who are intelligent, but on the other side, who are hot-blooded. We need that kind of combination to mutate the human condition, because otherwise it's going to be, I think, quite difficult.
Oh, absolutely. Like don't know about all, but many of the kind of civilizations that we view as being the pinnacle civilization, they were warrior civilizations. They had to be. Mm-hmm. I mean, the notion of a civilization that isn't a warrior civilization is a bizarrely modern phenomenon, right? But even then, I guess the modern wars, once we invented automatic weaponry and perhaps even just the gun, it changed, like, as you said, honor, which was a big part of these northern barbarian cultures. you rely on your brothers next to you and the strength to swing a sword and their ability to actually charge and be ferocious and courageous in battle. Once we're able to kind of outsource killing to these machines where it's just pushing a button or pulling a trigger, then that hot-bloodedness goes. There's still a courage in going into the battlefield for sure, but it's a much more abstracted courage.
Yeah. I mean, today you can see people who just organize these events when they just start, doing all kind of performances, but that's not the point. That has been a co-opting of the spectacle of the idea, because really it's about the challenges of our direct life, our lives, individual lives, and especially the idea that it is very honorable to respect those who choose the most hard path. That is the most important thing. We must every time we see someone who is not looking for the easy solution, that person we must take in account always and say, wow, this is the right stuff. We should take into account this person, because this person, even if this person doesn't know how to read, eventually this person shall provide us all the insights, all we need, all the stories, all the tales, all the experiences that a community needs. But we need that right stuff. If we don't have the right stuff, no matter how many degrees you get at the university, no matter how many PhDs you get, you don't have the blood. And this is what happened during that period in Europe. You had, and I don't like to talk much about the medieval times, because those are. Oh, there you are. I think we lost the connection, because those times were very conflictive in Europe, and I haven't studied much more than the Gothic period years ago. But yeah, I would say that the pinnacle of the Gothic period is something that that should inspire us as basically not going to the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris and just taking pictures. I mean, not that, but just understanding how it happened, the genesis of that. That's the great thing. The how it originated.
I guess the question is, has that ability to appreciate how it happened and to enjoy and to kind of feel in oneself that the grace and majesty of the operative, has it ever been anything possible for more than just a tiny minority who can actually get it? And is like the thing of taking a selfie with the Cathedral of Notre Dame what pretty much all peasants of all ages will have done if they happen to have a smartphone?
Well, good question.
Will continue to be the future.
Yes, probably we can only make modifications, I think, in our lives, and we can. It's very difficult to intervene. For example, let's put it this way: in general, it is believed that politicians have power. Well, that is something that could be discussed enormously. One thing I propose, which is very delicate or complicated to explain in a few minutes, but is that power is in the structures. Power is in those structures, and we have very few idea of who are those people. I'm not talking about people who are occult. It's just they don't appear in the media. We're talking about people who are CEOs, people who work in the industry, and they are regulating the system, but we have no idea of internal who they are. No? So it's very difficult to intervene in that kind of power today. But this power, I think that if we realize it has some limitations. It has some limitations. And the limitation it has is that it's driven by cybernetic paradigms that never end. What I mean with this is that they don't accept anyone who can be a ruler. They need coders, programmers. They need people who can understand the language of the system. But let's say you want to organize a community or a autonomic group of individuals. These systems are completely counteract that because you can't even get, I don't know, funds or to work economically with those networks. So it's very difficult to get power in that system. I think it's very important to understand that the system has its days over. I think cybernetics will reach its peak of how it can harness all the information from the planet to create that negative entropy, which is a term I don't like much because it's not much understood, but the monopoly of power based on information, so that you can extract every single drop of energy from the planet and create a new architecture, like a new brain upon the earth. And we know that when a child is born, the last part that when a fetus is being developed, the last part that develops is the brain, and then it has to just see light, but there is a point where the brain just finishes its development, and then as many neurologists know, the brain cells don't replicate anymore. They don't reproduce. So I think that in cybernetics, that's something we have to expect, and we have to be prepared to see the light when it comes. I think that's the whole preparation. It might sound very abstract, but potential scenarios, considering the limitations of specific architectures, to harness power. And cybernetics, anybody who understands the idea of cybernetics know that it's a closed system, which is basically it requires more and more monopolizing of information. Information, it's the only thing it feeds on. We're seeing more and more today. People are starting to be discontent about it. They don't believe anymore with all these fake news and all this kind of stuff. People don't, with all the newspapers transmitting ideological from the politicians who pay them and all this stuff, people are starting to become skeptic. So I think that's an interesting current of the limitations of all that, and that we could consider that. It's like there's this joke I saw once of a guy who was a kind of a rebellious character. You see this joke, this cartoon, and then he says, "Oh, all these years trying to fight against the system, and finally I realized that it fought by itself." Oh, so there's no point in fighting it. Just to understand it, I think.
Fascinating stuff. Very Hegelian as well. It's like it feels like an interesting, almost Hegelian way to act with it. Not necessarily posing an antithesis, but like expecting the flow of things to occur in the way that is proper and natural to them. You know that the leaves will fall in October.
Yeah.
And you know that you won't plant tomatoes in December. The metaphor I'm trying to refer to is meaning that there's a certain order and a way to do things, and indeed to know how to measure these changes and to know how to attune oneself to them is not even an intellectual knowledge, but it's a craft. It's a craft that is like agriculture, you know, and fascinating stuff to consider. I hadn't considered it in that way, to be honest, but this is fascinating stuff, Miguel.
Oh, well, I'm glad. It's not so easy to communicate, but I think it's the important thing is that it can fascinate and that we can get deeper in the ideas and develop them more. Some aspects I understand that are abstract. I mean, I can't just, you know, these books, I can't just summarize them in few words. But the important thing is to capture the important idea, and the idea of freedom, that we still have the capacity to be free, and to live a life with meaning. It doesn't mean that right now nobody, you know, it doesn't mean that you're going to be have an importance in many of these structures or corporations and stuff. But at least you handle their ideas, you capture their ideas. That's the craft. It's like I recommend people to have experience in these, just work experience, you know, in structures of power, if they have just experience when they, just because of the experience, so they can understand what kind of atmosphere exists in those places. And I don't mean by this to make a career. You know, if they want to make a career in those places, they're going to suffer more than they expect. But just to have an experience of which is the atmosphere in these places, and find a way of not being attached to that atmosphere. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Sorry, that was my...
And the idea is just to find that kind of Buddhist idea of non-attachment, so that then you understand the material with which you're working. You use the company. They don't use you. You use them. You contact a CEO. You know the vibes of the guy or the woman. You know the workers, and I say, okay, it's enough. I quit. Now I'm going to someone else. It's not, and they say, oh, yeah, you're crazy. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. Just I captured. I've assimilated the work, you know, and then I take it with me and you use it somewhere else. And you're working the material. It's no longer granite or marble. It's companies. It's corporations. This is the idea, which I really encourage people to say, well, what do you take out of the company? Those vibes in your hand. That's what you take. You never know where that can leave you afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The knowledge of the structure.
That's the whole
itself.
Mm-hmm.
This knowledge of the structure of power itself, as it pops its head in multiple places in our dimension, and how we are learning to be craftsmen here, there, and everywhere. Yeah. And its different sides.
Yes.
Do you have anything else to ask?
No. Well, I've got so many things to ask, and I really love this conversation. It's a great chance for me. I mean, I don't have these chances often. Not often, never.
Oh, it's been fantastic talking to you, mate. I feel like I'm kind of at the end of my concentration now, so I'd be quite happy to wrap up soon. Okay. But with like Daniel, I don't know how you're feeling.
I'm feeling great.
Time to wrap up. It's been a long conversation. We've been through so much stuff and so much good stuff. Miguel, you definitely have this uniquely different way of making sense of things. And that's a good thing. When after one of these conversations you're actually tired, that means that there was some substance, some thinking going on. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the show. Consider becoming our patron and helping us put out more content like this.
Patreon.com/technosocial.